The earth is going through a very tumultuous time, as we all know. But of all of the sections of the Urantia book, paper 195 really, it's when it gets most prophetic. What they're telling us is we're going through this stage where secularism, and it's not a word you hear a lot, secular. People don't really always know what that means. It's really just another word for abject materialism. It's when you're so absorbed with the outer world uh, and the commoditization of the meaning of life, where everything is relative. And the authors go into this and they attack head on secularism, materialism. They state emphatically that totalitarianism is where we're headed if we don't become more spiritual, and that's the literal interpretation. But it also tackles each one of those things. Right now, there's a term called scientism, and scientism is the belief. It's a dogmatic belief, and you'll hear it from people that are in positions of enormous power. These are the people that are running our institutions, and they don't believe in God, or at least they don't see where God is relevant in the quote real world. And that's the cry of the scientist. The scientist is human. And so the scientist has figured out that since God can't be explained, then we don't need to mess with that. And that, because those things tend to run downstream culturally, as the Urantia book says, to the man on the street, he's more or less, even modern Christians are more or less just secularists. Because as we all know, God is a whole life experience. It's not on Sunday, it's everything. Christ being the most religious man, why was he the most religious man? Because to him, everything was about the mission of serving God's will. This is completely absent from school. People find it offensive in many Western cultures. So how do we stop this? Because what's happening is as faith and spirituality and the religious experience leaves, it gets pushed out of society, something has to fill that void. And that's what this paper is about. And that's why we're in a lot of trouble if we don't harness what the Urantia book says is the solution to many of our problems. Paper 195 has been one of my favorite ever since I started reading the book, because it's really the one part of the book where they predictably talk about what we're going through right now. It's very important, and I want to start off by this quote, which is from paper 54, and they define what liberty really is. And they say that liberty is a self-destroying technique of cosmic existence when its motivation is unintelligent, unconditioned, and uncontrolled. True liberty is progressively related to reality and is ever regardful of social equity, cosmic fairness, universe fraternity, and divine obligations. And I believe in the context of what they're saying is humans are operating on a very limited scope. They have no idea that the universe is filled with living populated planets and it's guided by intelligent spiritual ministry. So to us, liberty is about free speech, it's about human rights and all these other things, but true liberty takes into account your cosmic obligations and fairness and the fact that we are part of God's universe and we are supposed to be doing His will. Humanity can no longer remain stable and progressive. And this is what I think the revelators are warning us about. So we know that secularism started about 300 years ago, and science began its pursuit of unlocking the mysteries of the universe. And what started out as a protest against religious tyranny has morphed into a form of cultural tyranny. Spiritual realities are ignored. Materialism is the ideology being celebrated by the West. Because of this, I believe that it has created an unstable influence because religion is no longer acting like a brake. Spiritual values no longer guide human behavior. Moral relativism rules the day. Now, the results of all of this embrace of materialism and secularism is that we have a rise in crime, drug dependency, commercialized human trafficking, on a global scale and the rise of mental illness and war. A deeply material ideology that is completely void of moral clarity. And that is what plagues society today on a grand scale. All are direct results of the new materialistic philosophy the UB talks about in paper 195. Let us remember that in section 4, 5, and 6 on secularism, materialism, and totalitarianism, the revelators warn us of the dangers of these ideologies, which are destructive to human progress. And they write, a lasting social system without a morality predicated on spiritual realities can no more be maintained than could the solar system without gravity. That's from paper 195, section 9. They also write in that same paragraph that without God, this is only the beginning of the dire harvest of materialism and secularism. Still more terrible destruction is yet to come. Now, the Urantia book says that secularism, science, the industrial age has brought us a lot of beneficent gains. We've eliminated a lot of diseases, our food production, our infrastructure, the way that we are more literate than we were, say, 200-300 years ago. All of that is vastly improved. But religion and spiritual faith has sort of taken a back seat. And as a result of this loss of religious faith or confusion, it's prompted scientific nihilism, the belief in accidental causation, that there is no universal plan. Moral relativism that allows for the idea that good is based on the immediate and temporal needs without regard for cosmic relationships or responsibilities. And today, materialistic emphasis is on things instead of knowledge and personality growth and spiritual growth. In fact, it writes from paper 111, any civilization is in jeopardy when 3/4 of its youth enter upon materialistic professions and devote themselves to the pursuit of sensory activities in the outer world, when we are obsessed with things instead of ideals. Science has also adopted an antagonistic approach to religious faith, and this has a destabilizing effect on the human condition. Quote, the violent swing from an age of miracles to an age of machines has proved altogether upsetting to man. The pursuit of mere knowledge without the attendant interpretation of wisdom and the spiritual insight of religious experience eventually leads to pessimism and human despair. And those are quotes from paper 195, section 6. A little knowledge is indeed disconcerting, I recall as the quote that comes after this paragraph. Today, scientists view natural law as inherent and automatic. It was the same mistake that Lucifer made as well in his proclamation. For example, the Big Bang is without a real purpose. It's really up to us to decide. And it's us to speculate on the truth of creation. But what is truth? That's a good question, and the Urantia book answers it. From paper 34, section 6, we're told, contrary to secular perspectives, quote, there truly exists within you a conspiracy of spiritual powers whose exclusive purpose is to effect your final deliverance from material bondage and finite handicaps. So it's saying that there is a thereafter. There is something next that comes. This is not all there is. I mean, the secular perspective is you only live once, and that's it. The Urantia book disputes that and says, no, you continue living. But in order to get deliverance from material bondage, that requires spiritual and living faith. But what are the fruits of religious faith? Well, number one, as we just discussed, salvation, escape from material death, and enduring values, enduring personality. Another aspect of the fruits of religious faith, increased wisdom and insight through prayer and meditation and worship. The growth of the personality, the enhanced relationship with God the Father, an even more meaningful and close relationship with Christ Michael. And there's also the components of anxiety and stress reduction, We have more than enough scientific evidence that shows that religious faith is medicinal as well as practical. And then, of course, there's the connection to the Supreme. It's like we're all connected with each other, but are we connected to the Supreme? What are the solutions that the Urantia Book revelators offer us in dealing with materialism and totalitarianism and secularism? Well, from paper 96, we read, "The time is ripe to witness the figurative resurrection of the human Jesus from his burial tomb amidst the theological traditions and the religious dogma of 19 centuries." In other words, it's time to upgrade our religious software. What a transcendent service if through this revelation the Son of Man should be recovered from the tomb of traditional theology and be presented as the living Jesus to the church that bears his name and to all other religions. So here they're specifying what's in this book is going to help you. From paper 196, section 2, paragraph 3, "The great mistake that has been made by those who have studied the Master's life is that some have conceived him as entirely human, while others have thought of him as only divine. Throughout the entire experience, he was truly both human and divine, even as he yet is." It's a wonderful quote. "It is indeed a pity that his followers failed to create a unified religion which might have given proper recognition to both the human and the divine natures of the Master as they were inseparably bound up in his earth life and so gloriously set forth in the original gospel of the kingdom. Indeed, the social readjustments, the economic transformations, the moral rejuvenations, and the religious revisions of Christian civilization would be a drastic and revolutionary change if the living religion of Jesus should suddenly supplant the theologic religion about Jesus." That's a direct call to Western civilization. It says that everything could change quickly if we would adopt the living religion of Jesus and what he taught. And the Urantia book gives his whole life, the life and teachings of Jesus. So in our conclusionary summary, what is the meaning of all of this? Well, the revelation alerts us to the dangers of materialism in society, which we can clearly see. They tell us a new perspective of Jesus' teachings offers humanity the surest path to restoring stability. It says the tenets of Jesus' teachings are: faith in God is a valid truth. Materialism without religious faith is destructive to society. And religious living, as Jesus taught, provides incentive for putting the golden rule into action, which benefits everyone. I think those are pretty important statements and proclamations. To follow Jesus means to personally share his religious faith and to enter into the spirit of the Master's life of unselfish service for man. One of the most important things a human being is to find out what Jesus believed, to discover his ideals, and to strive for the achievement of his exalted life purpose. Of all human knowledge, that which is of greatest value is to know the religious life of Jesus and how he lived it. And that's from paper 196, section 1, paragraph 3. Jesus said, "Regardless of who I am and what power I may or may not wield, I have always been and always will be subject to the will of my Paradise Father." I think that's a pretty great way to end this presentation. Could it really be so simple? So let's talk about it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. The one thing I didn't emphasize in that, and maybe I should have, is the importance of family, because I think family, and I know that we recently had a conference with Urantia book readers talking about family. I think that, and in addition to the truths of Jesus, are the two missing components, because family family as an idea is under assault in the West particularly. And that's where it starts to get political. And I don't want to get political, but we seem to have lost the value of family in society. And that's everything. So anyway, I wanted to sort of start off by saying, putting this as a preposition. Is it us that we need to get the Christians to come on board, or do we have to go on board with the Christians and hopefully they won't kick us out once they realize we're Urantia book readers? But how do we get the expanded truth of Jesus into Christian mainstream thought? That's a challenge, I think. And that's, I think, because what's going to happen in the Urantia book in 300 years? Is it going to be that, or is it going to go the way of Abner? If we recall, when Paul was teaching his brand of the gospel, and then Abner was sticking more true to the teachings in Philadelphia. Well, Paul won. Paul won that race. We might have more of Jesus's teachings, and they may have penetrated perhaps the East more effectively in these last 2,000 years. But water seeks its lowest level. So Christianity apparently was intended to go this way. Who knows? But those are just some of the follow-up thoughts that we might want to talk about.
Okay. Joanne?
Something occurred to me when you were speaking and you were talking about the materialism, and I'm thinking, and about family. And it made me think about this trend that's been happening, and that is no contact with parents. Young people are cutting their parents off from their lives. And they're saying, you're not going to see your grandchildren. And, there's often no reason for it. And it's almost as if, I can be cynical and say, well, okay, well, this was the generation that expected a trophy just for showing up,
Mm-hmm.
There was that. But it's got to be more than that. I just don't understand it. And it almost feels sinister in some way that I can't explain. So anyway.
Well, it's a social power shift. And if you look into cultures like early 20s in China, there was the government there actually, well, everybody will tell you, if you ask Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Mao Zedong, they'll tell you if you want to take over a country, get to the children first. And so the idea, this is how what I'm saying about, materialism and secularism is the ideology that is being promoted by the institutions of Western culture. And that has a trickling down effect because it gets into the educational system. It gets into the finance system. It gets into it has all these tendrils, and think of it as like a virus that slowly takes over, and everything is about the individual gets lost. The soul doesn't exist in the human being, and the parental relationships, we don't see them as having the value that our forefathers had. I mean, every civilization, we know that the Urantia book talks often in marriage and family life. Certain groups of societies uphold it and they do better. And the ones that don't usually fall way to communism or some sort of totalitarian paternal. They warn multiple times about the dangers of paternal government. In fact, in I think paper 71, which I'm doing a piece on, if you think about why they have three chapters of family, and then they go into the Adam family and all the things that he was trying to teach, the Adamic influence. We're lost. We have lost, and I say we, I mean secularized Western culture. I can't speak to, Eastern culture, but I can speak to Western culture because I grew up in California and I watched all the cultural trends, and you're absolutely right. People have lost the smart people in our society are not reminding the regular folks that families do matter. And that's where you get all of your skills. Kids today don't even want to have kids because they're too worried about producing too much carbon or that they're not going to be able to afford it. They're going to, these young people, my kids included, I'm 62. I'm like, where are the grandkids? Is it time? Come on. That's an experience I want to. Unfortunately, I do have one grandchild, and it's a wonderful experience because that relationship state has an influence on the grandchild, and it also has a tremendous influence on adults too. And if people don't know that that experience exists, then what's going to motivate them to do it?
Obviously we're all children, so we know that experience, and this is how we understand our relationship with God, right? And it's really important also to be a parent. Now, some of us can't all be parents here, but we can all have young people who we can fill that role, and they try to make up for that in the mansion world if you don't. But like you said, that experience of being in the family is the starting point to that opens the door to knowing what your relationship is with the Father. So what's more important than that, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, Tom.
Speaking of churches that are changing, there is a church called I think it's West Coast Church, Gulf Stream Church, something like that, whose pastor announced to the congregation that he does not believe in the atonement doctrine anymore.
Oh
It's
man.
a
Wow.
large, very large church in Sarasota. He lost half of his congregation when he
Really?
did that, though. So, in answer to the people who was brought up a few minutes ago, if we can introduce the Urantia book or tell people that we are students of the Urantia book, I know several people, one here in Florida, who just recently got kicked out of his Baptist church because somebody found out about that he was a student of the Urantia book from his business card, which had the three concentric circles on it.
Why would they do that? I'm not familiar with this happening. It's
Well,
tragic.
it is. It's happening more than you think that it's happening. Um, I belong to a Christian church, and I belong with that to that church to do volunteer work, to do service work, because the mechanism is there for me to do that. And I have for a long time been involved with singing in choral groups, so I'm involved with that as well there. But I'm very hesitant about saying anything to anybody because I know what their doctrine is. They're pretty conservative. And if I mention that I don't believe in the blood of Jesus that saved me, they're going to kick me out. Okay, I'm pretty sure they will kick me out. Um, One other thing that what Joanne was talking about, Joanne Strobel, I very much relate to that. Not myself, fortunately, not for that reason, but I have heard so many stories of children cutting off their parents and to their grandchildren, for example, because they didn't get the COVID jab.
Yeah.
That was the biggest reason. And even if they came to the realization that the COVID and the COVID jab wasn't as what it was made out to be, now the relationship is destroyed or it's damaged
Yeah.
severely.
Sure.
And and you have to think about who may be behind this evil. Is it just
And
humans?
why? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is a story that came out the other day, and this alludes to the scientific aspect of materialism. They're trying to there's a court case, Tennessee versus Scrimeti, and it's being seen by the Supreme Court. And at issue is whether doctors should be allowed to give hormone blockers or gender affirming surgery to minors without parental consent. The state of Tennessee is arguing that they should be allowed to do it. And then of course, obviously, the court case is no, they're young, they're minors. Why would a doctor do that? Because if I came in and said remove my arm, would a doctor do that just because I feel like it's not my arm?
Right.
And so, but what does that represent is that there is a secularization of medicine and science where they're not looking at the reality of biology, which is that
Hmm.
there are two sexes. It's clear. Now, if you want to have variations and have different proclivities, fine, but you wouldn't affirm a child's desire for proclivities at such a young age because they make decisions all the time that would ultimately be suicidal. And that's why I started off at the very beginning of this presentation. What is true liberty? Liberty is being aware of your cosmic obligations. In this case, we're all here to serve at the pleasure of Christ, or Christ Michael, because he tells us, do the Father's will. What's the Father's will? Serving others as you would have in applying the golden rule. That's as simple as you can get as a message.
You know what? That's a great question. What is liberty? And it's serving others. And if you're not healthy because you pursued a strategy that damages your own body, you cannot serve. And if you don't have a healthy mind and body, especially at our age, because most of us are getting older, you can't serve God. You can't do his will. So it is so careful to use critical thinking skills to say, what is the best thing for me to do at this point? How can I best serve mankind by taking care of myself and educating myself with maybe alternative news that's out there that can help me make a good decision? Because there's good medical advice, medical professionals out there.
Whether it's too many chemicals in the air or these other things, these are the ramifications of materialism, right? Nobody's really thinking about the true impact of what they, of some of these things. But I just want to
Yeah.
make sure we have a chance for everyone to talk. I
Sure,
appreciate
sure.
your input. Sandra.
Jim, thank you so much. This presentation means quite a bit to me for two reasons. And that's your touching on materialism and family. I'm a Chicago native. I left there in '97 and moved down to Biloxi, Mississippi, which is where I found the Urantia book, sadly, after I left Chicago. And subsequently, about 3 years after the book came to me in a very unusual way, I went through Katrina and lost everything. I was working in a casino as a dealer, so I was really in a very greedy environment all the time, a very ugly environment when you know the inside. I learned a lot about materialism in Katrina, and it's been an incredible asset to the rest of my journey. The other thing you touched on, family, and I've got to say, I'm going through this journey right now. I was an adopted child, an only child, and my mother died when I was 18. My dad remarried, so I was kind of like an orphan after that. And I was lied to about who my real family was, that I didn't find out until I was 57. And I think a place that, in my opinion, we all missed the boat is until we can see every living thing on this planet as our family and not try to dissect it as to my sister, my uncle, my mom. I don't think we're going to get it right, because I don't think there's anybody listening right now that hasn't been done wrong by family. And sometimes the things that the hardest things that have happened to you have been a result of family. And you have to be open to the most somebody who you would never think would be your family, and you have to be open to them maybe being your family, and to accept others like a family. It's the entire planet.
Thank you. And so let me ask you this. Do you think that our education system, if we were to follow the principles, for example, when they talk about how education is on government on a neighboring planet, and they're telling us how this one very sophisticated, advanced culture, the size of Australia, and they're telling us how they run their schools and how they teach them to grow food. They teach them about parental responsibility. They talk about the fact that if you get married, you have to live together for 2 years first. You have to fill out forms. Now, that to me sounds like big government, but on the other hand, it also serves a purpose, because it sounds to me like these people have decided that destructive families are destructive to society. We haven't learned that lesson yet, because
No.
there's too much money to be made.
Exactly.
That's right. There's an old joke that says the reason divorce is good is because everybody has to buy twice as much furniture.
Mhm.
So until we get off and get back the profit motive and all that, I'm not saying I don't like money. Again, reading the Urantia book, they're very clear. It's okay to accept. It's interesting. There's a weird dichotomy going on because people who live well in the West seem to feel so guilty about it that they're sort of letting it go. Like they're saying, well, we don't want all this privilege and we don't want all this wealth. But the original question is, what if we took what the Urantia book is teaching us and actually applied it in areas like public education? It doesn't have to be, they don't have to get credit for it. But what if our wise local legislators who read the Urantia book would actually go to their school boards and say, hey, why don't we do a curriculum on growing tomatoes and turn it into a scholastic competition?
Absolutely.
That one little simple thing, teaching people how to grow food.
I totally agree. And if I can just state also that when I went through Katrina, I realized, I mean, I lost everything, my job, my home, my business, people, my community, everything, and you have to say as a family, and I'm talking about your neighbor or the little old lady who has nobody down the street, those family people, you have to stand together and be able to grow your own food, be able to educate yourself, to do the things to survive and to help others and pull them along with what I think is the greatest thing, and that's hope.
Yeah, I would ask Joanne Strobel. I know for decades we've had this wonderful library placement program in public libraries. Have we made any way in maybe having the Urantia book put into school libraries so that young people can be exposed to it?
Well, Marianne Hughes is nodding because she's been really good at disseminating books into libraries. Marianne, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, the foundation offers a mustard seed grant program. And my husband and I, Matt, sitting over here, who has taught kids at a charter school in Hawaii how to grow food and combined it with his science as a science class. Anyway, but that's sort of another subject that we were just hitting on. But yes, we have done that. And now we're doing it in Ireland, and which brings up another subject, adopting a family in need. My Zoom study group, which is a very international group, we have adopted a family from Malawi. The father has a scholarship to get his PhD. He personally distributed books all over Malawi. And he then got a college degree, he got a master's degree, and now he's getting a PhD
in Ireland.
In Ireland at Maynooth University.
Terrific.
And he has two lovely daughters, and they are now getting an excellent education free in Ireland. And we help buy them uniforms. And so we as a group, we're 12 or 13 of us every week, meet on Zoom every Sunday, and we are family. I mean, we do feel like family. And since all our kids are grown up, we have decided to do this as a small group and as a community to help this family. And it's not that hard to find someone that needs it. And I really suggest that.
So just a kind of a jump in point here, I think that William Sadler tried to turn the Urantia book into an instruction course in some of his writings and stuff. How do we take the lessons from the Urantia book and introduce them that would be so helpful and beneficial to society without it having to be directly from the Urantia book, which is a real turnoff? Well, why can't we just introduce the lessons that we learn, whether it's about family and marriage, and what prevents us from being able to introduce the Urantian concepts to the greater public and greater culture? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. And what made these comments and your question with him is people like to argue over theology and define themselves by theology, which is not actually the religion, right? So was Mary divine? Is the blood this? Is, how many can you eat meat on Fridays? Everyone likes to have a rule, and they exclude or include people by the rule, when really the truth of, there is a God, there is, we are all his children, we should treat each other the right way, etc. That part, even though everyone agrees on it, gets lost. So yeah, and this idea of how do you relate to the larger religious community? I mean, it's preposterous to think the Urantia movement is going to overcome the world and not somehow be a part of the billions of people, Christianity and the other great religions too, who share these. Like, there has to be a merger at some point. It's not just Christianity is not just going to stop and Urantianism and take its place, right? And even paper 195, the whole section, they talk about Christianity's problem, right? Because they know that these two things can't exist separately forever. But Sherry, Chris, Jan, and Michael. So Sherry, take it away.
Hey, thank you. I think when we introduce the Urantia book, we have to approach it from the idea that Jesus approached all his teachings from, where the people that he went to, he gradually first sought out what they were thinking and gradually inserted his ideas into it in positive ways that was attractive. And he was an attractive human being, so that helped too. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to try to do this real quick, is on section 5, the modern problem. The 20th century has brought new problems for Christianity and all other religions to solve. The higher a civilization climbs, the more necessitous it becomes the duty to seek first the realities of heaven in all of man's efforts to stabilize society and facilitate the solution of its material problems. So I know too that the Urantia book.
That's a great quote, by the way. I should have included it in the, yeah.
Yeah, and the Urantia book is going to take time. The Urantia revelation is going to take time. It's probably not going to, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but eventually this book will come of age. It's all the information anybody could ever hope to want. And I think we have to focus our energy on gently giving it to people. And unfortunately, I think myself too, I have to expect some disappointments when I do that.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, thanks. I was just thinking things that we touched on in the presentation regarding liberty. I think in our lives, we have to be able to define more openly to those that we speak to the difference in liberty, like true liberty as opposed to false liberty. It's defined very specifically in the Urantia book. False liberty is when you take the liberty all for yourself and you don't care about anyone else and how that affects them. And we see a lot of that today. I think we have to sometimes just stop the conversation and say, okay, and just give them the definitions of what real liberty is and what it isn't. We're seeing all of these things happening today in our society. And it's explained very well in paper 195. But what we're seeing are really symptoms of a disease, really. And the sooner we identify what the real root cause of this is, and people can see the truth in it, the quicker we can rewrite or turn around our direction. And I think everything started going bad when corporations were given the rights of people. Corporations aren't people. Corporations operate on a profit motive. They have no righteousness within them. They have no feelings. And we've given our whole society to the corporations to rule. And they're doing it now because they can pay for the politicians.
A lot of people share your view. Another way to think about it that is, I think, saying the same thing, it's a little less threatening sometimes, people, is that what a corporation or any group allows to happen is the group can make a decision and no one person has to take responsibility for it, right? So where you would never, I don't want to get topical, but you would never deny your neighbor health coverage. But if you're in a group, you can all agree that has to be the decision and no one's really living the truth of that decision or its impact, right? And that obviously groups are important for getting things done, but they can be abused. Why? Because the people in them don't have the spiritual compass because we think it's not important. Sorry, now I'm getting preachy. Yeah, Jan, go ahead.
I want to give you a little bit of general view because many of you are talking about things which happen in the individual life. My background is from the country of Poland, and I can tell you one thing: individual growth through family. Family give us the base for teamwork. I think somewhere in the Urantia book is saying that the most important thing which we have to learn through life is teamwork because we are here alone, but in the future, in eternity, there is no many places that we will be alone serve. That means if we don't get along with the neighbor here, we will have to learn in the other world how to get into your feelings with the people and with the other people. I'm watching Poland right now because the Roman Catholic ran this country for a long time, but now I will say 80% of the country become secular. The faith people gets through the church before disappear because of untruth being told in theology in the Roman Catholic Church. And I believe personally that if Pope will not change his way, looking at the truth and changing, it's not a matter of being, with wife or without wife, how priests work. It doesn't matter. The basic truth, it's important. If they don't change, they eventually will change into secular country, like in US, or even I've been in Israel, and half of the Israeli people are secularists. I mean, they live in the place where Jesus was, and they don't believe in it. Then, just making short, individual faith, we have to keep it. And what Jesus told us is the belief, but it's a living belief. That means if we introduce whatever is teaching in Urantia book in our personal life, through the example, through the showing how we can live, this will change others. Sometimes I get the information from other people, oh, how nice to be with you. It's so, you are so happy all the time. Why you are so happy all the time? I said, because I believe in God. But anyway, that's my view of this thing.
Well, you said a lot there, Jan, and you made me think. If you want to see what secularism and abject materialism can do to a society, walk around downtown Los Angeles after dark, or downtown Chicago after dark, or New York. That is what life looks like without God. I think that's not what is intended for us, but it's a result. We've had a deficit. The Caligassia's 100. That didn't work. Adam and Eve, they got sidestepped. Christ gets murdered on the cross, and it shows just how far we have to go. We have a long way to go. And so I think that the revelators look at us as being sort of like children with guns in our hands. We don't know what we're doing, and we need to go back to some of the Western truths that have survived, including the teachings of Jesus. So,
like you were just saying, without this sort of morality that traditional religion used to supply, and the community sort of standards and the family life that used to be supported by that institution, we end up with just people doing whatever they want, right? And selfish behavior and harmful behavior and things like that, like you were talking about. Even people like Richard Dawkins now, who's famous for being an atheist,
Yeah.
are sort of recognizing that, well, the culture of the church, these values, these humanist values that we think we can keep, even though we have no anchor for them. Like he's saying that there's value in those things, and we do need to have some kind of morality. It's got a different explanation of why it should be this way, which we would all know is, trying to build a house on toothpicks. We need some basic morality. If you've cut this off from atheism has abandoned it, but what do you replace it with?
The good news is that after what the many people say, that the last election sort of indicated that people were sort of tired of trying to experiment with what kind of new government we could create just because we wish for it. And they see the destruction in its path, and more people are buying Bibles. There's revivals going on all around the world. I do believe that since I wrote my book, things have actually gotten better, but we had to go through a whole lot of hurt. And I think COVID taught us that we can't trust the government as much as we thought we could. And I think this is waking people up to the fact that institutions run by men are ultimately going to be corrupt unless they're held accountable. And how do you hold somebody accountable if you don't have some sort of a moral line? And that moral line should be our children, the sanctity of family. Well, I just went and took my car in because I had an oil leak. We all come to expect that when we go take our car in, we're going to get jacked up on the price and we're going to get ripped off. And we've come to accept this kind of behavior. But it comes from the overall ideology that money is everything. And again, I'm not an anti-capitalist, trust me, but what I'm saying is it's just as simple as if we could somehow teach children the golden rule as the first lesson in life and learn that in our homes, that would solve a lot of our problems because we would start treating each other the way we want to be treated. And I think
Right.
that was the essence of, and I think that is the rule that rules the universe. So, and it's also interesting to note that the Melchizedeks are the only self-ruling other than the creator sons. That's true liberty, self-government, self-governing, when you can limit your wants and desires out of the recognition of your cosmic responsibilities to the family of everybody around you. And it's such a simple rule, but it's gotten lost because they've taken the messenger and they've marginalized him. Now,
Right.
why that is, we don't know. Maybe it's Caligastia's influence. Maybe it's just our own behavior. So I'll leave it at that. But I think things are getting better, and we're starting to realize that morality and family and faith all have a real role in society.
Well, there's definitely a real hunger for it, and you see all these ads now on TV. I think there was even one in the Super Bowl, right? These Jesus ads,
Yeah,
that are, there's nothing wrong with them at all, right? Now, sometimes they talk about, okay, forgive your sins, fine, we would put that differently, but
sure. But
clearly,
still,
if
the message is great. He
exactly,
gets it. He
exactly,
gets you.
yeah. Okay, let's get to some other folks. Michael.
I was in Christianity for 20 years. I became an evangelist. I traveled from church to church. I visited many prisons, and I saw God do many great things. But never once was I ever using the Bible when God would do something. He would say something to me, and then I would say it to the congregation or to the prisoners, and I would see the Spirit of God move tremendously. I've been a student of the Urantia book for 16 years. I was out of Christianity for 8 years before I discovered the Urantia book, and by chance, it was a discovery from working in a recording studio, and the head engineer had a little paragraph hanging on the wall. And I was there alone one day, and as I was walking out the door, I noticed this paragraph, and it was from the Urantia book, but it didn't say it was just a paragraph. I read it, and I said to myself, I know this. I know what it's saying. And I read it again and again, and it was like something was telling me it was a truth. So I called my friend and I said, what's this saying you have hanging on the wall here? And he said, "That's from the Urantia book." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Hold on a minute." So he drove there with a brand new copy of the Urantia book and handed it to me. And the question was raised, do we take Christianity, or do we take the Urantia book into Christianity, or does Christianity come to the Urantia book? And those are many questions that I had too, but it boils down to we need to become absolute inside and out students of the Urantia book, because I think the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth, is going to be moving soon upon society, and society is going to need people to answer their questions. And I believe it's going to be the Urantia book community that answers those questions. And it's a programming, or it's a operating system running on us. And so I look at the Bible as an operating system. For us to take the Urantia book into the Christian community would be like taking an Apple operating system into the Windows community. It won't work. They are Bible conscious, not God conscious. And that Bible consciousness makes them feel that they have the truth. I don't think that the Christian community, the churches, they're going to ever come around. There's too much money in it, for one thing, and too much control and power. So the idea of taking the Urantia book to the Christian community is, in my opinion, since I was a 20-year student of the Bible, I don't think is possible. I think they're too ingrained. They're satisfied with their static, one-size-fits-all worldly biblical consciousness. And I have no
Yeah.
other way of stating that.
I think you're got a good point. Yeah. Well, what did Chris Halverson say? Oftentimes you want to take new religion and pour it into old wineskins. And that's typically what happens. And we saw, think maybe there's a story in the Mithraic recital in the Urantia book where it talks about a lot of Mithraics were won over to Christianity for one simple reason, because they allowed women in their churches. Christians did. The Mithraic cult did not. And so that's why we celebrate Christmas. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned there. Maybe if the Urantia book has, you said, Michael, that the Christian of today is a one-size-fits-all religion, but it's getting less so. It doesn't fit all. It fits only people who have a particular ideological view. And the Urantia book is for everybody. There is no sectarianism in the Urantia book. So that would be my only hopeful comment on what you said.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Mike, because what you said, the real religion is happening in each of us, right? In you, and it's not actually the church, and that's one of the key messages of the book. But I have to go back to what Sherry said. How would Jesus do it? He wouldn't tell somebody else that they're wrong. He just would emphasize what they're getting right, and those things would eventually come out. And it's very interesting when you talk to your Urantia readers, because we have a whole spectrum. On one end, you have people who had a bad experience with the church, right, or were mistreated or whatever, and they found the Urantia book as oh my gosh, I'm glad I got out of that mess, versus people who are very much even still in the movement, who are looking for more answers, right? And that tends to color our view as to which way the arrow is pointing. And it's I think in general what you hear is the denominations that are more fundamentalist and more dogmatic are the ones that we see a little less hope for. But I'm not Catholic just by my name, but the Catholics left the Bible a long time ago, right? And they have great thinkers over the centuries, and some of those people are starting to oh, maybe we don't need this atonement doctrine, like Thomas said in his particular church, which I realize is not Catholic. But so there's a whole mess of stuff going on there, and somehow it's going to fall into place. But it is up to the individuals, right? It's up to the individuals to make that happen. There's not going to be Jan talked about the power of the Pope, and that would be something, but it's probably not going to be the Pope adopting the Urantia book. It's going to be a number
Although
of people.
I did
Although you
read that
never
he's
know.
familiar.
You
Yeah,
never know.
yeah.
That could be the thing that, puts us on the map. Jim, what were you saying about that?
Oh, just I was reading Byron Belezzo's book, Your Evolving Soul, recently. That the aspect of it that I liked was if you tell people, you realize you have a soul, don't you? And just let them noodle that for a little while, and that could be the seed that
Yeah.
sprouts inside of them. What does that even mean, right? And but he's saying that he believes Pope Francis was introduced to the Urantia book.
Oh, yes, I have heard that. So yeah, it could be working. Well, it's almost guaranteed. We know the angels and the thought adjusters and the spirit of truth are working behind the scenes. There's no doubt about that. There's probably a lot going on that we don't really appreciate is actually coming from the source that we know of. It's just it's not in this format that it's explicit like the book. Let me go to Alfonso.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alfonso Garcia, and I've been listening to all these pieces that you've been, putting up, especially the one that Michael was talking about the church bringing the Urantia book to the Christianity. I thought I was the only one who thought about that. That is, they're just so happy to giving them tithes, and they're happy that they accomplish what the church or the pastor expect from them, not what God expect from them. I just thank you for giving me the chance to say something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alfonso. Marianne, you got 45 seconds, and then Tom will have 45 seconds.
Dr. Matthews, he's going to put in his 2 cents.
Okay, first, the ring.
I want one of those.
The kids would ask me every day, what's going on with the ring? I said that it's everywhere, forever, without limit, eternal, infinite, universal. That's the love I have for Marion.
No, and the father.
No, that's what I would tell them. The next thing is that when you're doing education, you think of the symbol as your guide to how to teach people. So in the center, that middle target is the community. The next circle outside is the self. And the final outside circle is the content. You get the kids to connect the community with the content through their own self idea of how it could be done. And the final thing is, what if you did that and you built a circular garden of 3 concentric circles in the middle of the campus on for a Hawaiian charter school, and the people their goal was to grow enough sweet potatoes to feed the whole campus lunch for the whole year. And that was but never once showing the ring, talking about my theory of communication, building that garden, never once did I say anything about the Urantia book. Never once. It was always under the radar. And if you go under the radar, then you don't have to make people think that they're being threatened.
Great.
Thank you, Matt.
I love it.
Thank you, Matt. Tom, real quick.
Jim, just quickly, what motivated you to do this now, and what would you like to do in the future to move it forward? What are your ideas?
Well, what motivated to do the podcast was that I saw it as an emerging technology that was very easy to do. And at the time, I was reading about how the Falun Gong were treated in China. And I was surprised by 2 components. The first was that how is it that in a country that for 100 years has been communist, did 100 million people suddenly become religious? That was struck me because it literally had been beaten out of their society, and yet there it is. Falun Gong is very similar to Buddhism, and it has a lot of Taoism and all that, but it's the essence of what it teaches. It's universal. The second was, again, just because of the emerging technology, I thought, well, the more people that I can share this information. I guess David Zebedee was probably my inspiration because I'm not a preacher. I'm not a particularly religious guy that goes to church, but I believe so much in the Urantia book because it makes me feel like what you guys have been saying. It's like you feel like this is it. This is telling me the truth. It speaks to me. It always has from the first minute. And I'd always been looking for a way to do that, but I never found the opportunity in radio, which is my background. You know, I thought of once of syndicating a 1/2 hour Urantia book radio show across the country. But that would be an expensive endeavor. Doing a podcast is a lot cheaper. So that's why I decided to go that route.
Mhm.
And it hits the mark. I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan or anything. My feeling is, as long as it's out there, I'll let the seraphs take over. And if the midwayers and the angelic unseen friends can steer people, somebody will Google Urantia podcast and it'll pop up. And also the folks over at Urantia Talk blog were also an early inspiration to me as well, because they've done a great job. And it's about having that dialogue so that people can hear people talking about it.
Obviously this topic, we went into so many different areas. It has so many implications. It's so important. So obviously the discussion continues. So check out Jim's podcast. It's a ton of content there on the web. You can see he's a great speaker, great guy.